Shalom, my friends, from here in Israel. There is so much talk about what's happening around the world, specifically with Israel and America stopping Iran from getting the nuclear weapon. And there's so much information that we get from the news and so much information that we don't have. And so the best way I've seen to understand what's happening is by speaking firsthand to someone who has lived it her entire life. So I'm here with my friend Panteha, who is the daughter of Iranian refugees, and we are going to hear her story today. And through her story, I pray and hope that we'll be able to understand a little bit more of what's happening in Iran. Why is Iran different than Afghanistan and Iraq? And what is the future for the Iranian people and the entire world? So Panteha, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Yael, for having me. I'm so honored to be here. Thank you all for joining us.
Let's start with your family's story. Could you tell us a little bit about your parents, your grandparents? They were born in Iran?
My parents were born in Tehran, in a thriving and large Jewish community, Iranian Jewish community there. The Iranian Jewish community, of course, has ancient history all the way back to before Esther and Mordechai and the story of Purim in the book of Esther.
It's Persia.
Persia. We describe ourselves as Persian Jews. Even as exiled Persian Jews from Persia.
Yeah, you still relate to yourself as a Persian Jew.
Absolutely.
Even though you grew up in LA and you live now in Israel, your identity is a Persian Jew.
Absolutely. I speak fluent Farsi. I was raised in a household of Iranian Jewish refugees in Los Angeles, which is the sort of world center of the Iranian diaspora of expatriate and refugee Iranians. I grew up speaking Farsi, Persian in my household. I grew up in a household that played Persian language radio.
Wow. Every
morning of my life. We had a Persian language television station for news in the early 80s after the overthrow of the Shah of the Pahlavi dynasty in Iran.
So let's go there.
Okay.
Your grandparents were born in Tehran. Your parents were born in Tehran. Why did they leave? What year and what happened that they had to escape?
So already in the late 70s, my father already got a sense that things were changing.
Well, what was it like in the 70s in Tehran, in Iran, that it even changed? Was it always Islamist? Was Iran always run by the mullahs?
Since the rise of the last Shah, the last Pahlavi Shah, the king Reza Pahlavi in Iran. That was in, I believe, in the late 50s. I think his coronation was in the early 60s. Throughout his entire reign, there was an emancipation of Jews and a general golden age for the wider Iranian population. His father had already ended the feudal system. Feudal as in lords of the land and serfs and peasants. He had ended that system and even he had modernized the country and had given land to many poor tribes and families throughout the country.
So it was a modern,
it was a modernizing country.
Did your mom have an education?
My mother had an education. Even my grandmothers had an education.
Did they have to wear a hijab?
No, they did not have to wear a hijab. Certainly not since the Pahlavi reign, which was already in the late 20s, I believe.
So from the 1920s around until the 1979, which we'll talk about, there was freedom in Iran. The people knew freedom, equality, education, diversity. We have Jewish communities who are thriving in Tehran.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the doors and gates to the universities and to various career fields had opened up to the Jewish community. And indeed, the community was thriving more and more. Through the 70s, it was truly a golden age. They only have the sweetest memories of life in Iran during those days. Jews were allowed to be even landowners, and
which is very rare in Muslim-ruled countries.
Absolutely, their businesses were allowed to thrive, and the future was really looking promising to them until the late 70s. The last Shah of Iran, had sent students. 50,000 students out to universities throughout the world, the top universities all across Americas. I had 3 uncles studying in university in the late 70s in all over the United States. And what had happened was that a lot of those students, when they returned, had brought back, and also there was some festering ideologies that were anti-royalist ideologies that were festering, and there was a brewing revolt, uprising beginning to happen. That's a whole other story, and one day perhaps you'll look into who were the elements there. But the Iranian community, whose lives were overturned when the Shah was overthrown and the Islamic regime were brought into the country, very much do blame the American president at the time.
So tell us about that. It's 1979. Carter is president in America.
Jimmy Carter is president.
There is freedom since the 20s in Iran, and there's an internal uprising of people, a clash between Islamists and modern.
Well, the clash hadn't quite happened. Khomeini, who was the Ayatollah, he was exiled at the time. He was living in France, and there were tapes, recordings of his teachings brought in to the country, and there was a crackdown from the Shah, from the king's end, because these tapes were building that sense of revolt in the public.
So there's something happening in Iran.
Something happening. There were more and more protests in the street, akin to what we, the American universities have seen in the past few years since October 7th.
Calling for a revolution.
Calling for revolution, calling for uprising.
And then there are Americans who are kidnapped in Tehran.
So I believe that happened, if I'm not mistaken, what happened was the king, Reza Shah, the king in Iran, loved his people so much, and he saw that there was so much angst happening, and they were trying to burn down the cities, and this revolt could possibly lead to a civil war. From his love for his people and from his love for his country, he decided that he did not want to be the cause of a civil war. He did not want to see bloodshed in his country, and he decided to abdicate and step down, and he left from the country. And at that point, various governments in the world had collaborated to let Khomeini come in and put him up. They had pedestaled him as the incoming new leader. He had promised the people, even non-Muslim, non-Islamist students and public all across Iran, had been promised by him that he would disperse gold in the streets and all kinds of promises. So they were believing some new wonderful era was going to come. And sadly, when Khomeini came into Iran, one of the first things that he did was rounded up a group of 10 Jewish leaders and other leaders in Iran, the wealthy, the businessmen, the generals, and he promptly assassinated them.
So we had a situation in Iran where there was prosperity, there was advancement, there were people going to America to study and bring back what they knew to Iran. There was a civil clash of society happening, and so Khomeini, who they thought was going to bring peace to the people, actually came in and immediately clamped down on his Islamist ways, taking away the freedoms, implementing all the policies we are still feeling today.
It happened in my parents' wedding night.
And that was your family. So tell us your family. Where was your family
My
there?
parents' wedding night in November 1978. My grandmother tells a story that they brought my mother home. They brought my mother from the hair salon, from the cosmetic salon. She had her makeup done and her hair done and her veil set, and they had to put a full hijab on her. It was the first night of a lockdown, countrywide martial law. And instead of whatever plans they had for a wedding hall, the wedding was held at home in my grandparents' house. They brought her straight from the hair salon in her full dress and a veil to cover her to their home.
That
to
was
hold
the new
wedding
law.
there.
Women had to cover their face. Khomeini came
Cover
in,
their hair.
cover their hair, and go by Islamic law of modesty immediately. Okay.
So my father had been sensing some kind of really ugly, frightening change coming upon that society already in the last few years, the late 70s, and that's when he decided he wanted to get married. He told my grandmother, he said, "I'm moving to America, and if you want me to take a wife, I need your help to find a bride. So she, that's how she got in touch with my other grandmother, who was her dear friend, who had a young daughter of age, and the young couple met, and soon the wedding was arranged. And so they had already had their tickets. They got married in November. By January, they were on a flight. January 1979, they were on a flight to Los Angeles.
Because they felt it wasn't safe.
Because they felt it wasn't safe. They knew it wasn't safe. One of my uncles in Los Angeles had already prepared the house next door to his to receive as much family as possible. And soon after my parents' wedding, as soon as that assassination of the 10 Jews, leaders of the Jewish community, had happened, among them was Mr. Habib El-Ghanayan, who was a philanthropist, who had built hospitals, who had imported the first plastics into Iran. He had built orphanages all around the countries. His friends warned him, you must leave the country, it's dangerous for you. And he said, I have only ever donated, I have only ever done everything possible to build Iran and modernize Iran and care for our people. The Jews of Iran felt very much a part of the Iranian people. And he had built orphanages. He couldn't imagine, he couldn't fathom that anybody would want to harm him. And immediately he was put up against a firing squad. He was one of the first who was assassinated. And as soon as that happened, the entire Jewish community of Iran was alarmed and realized we must leave now. So thank goodness, 99% of my entire family and extended family, grandparents, aunts and uncles, great aunts and uncles, and all of the second cousins, large, blessed, beautiful family, everyone left. Just about everyone left.
So you were raised now in Iran.
I was raised in Los Angeles, in this community.
With the story of Iran running through your veins.
Absolutely.
That you spoke Farsi in the house, you listened to news in Farsi from Iran.
My lullabies, bedtime stories were all in
Farsi.
Persian language.
And tell us a little bit about what the feeling was living as refugees, Jewish refugees in America who had escaped Iran, seeing this country be overtaken by the Islamists. Was the feeling that this is the new reality, or that one day it would change? Was it a feeling of hope or helplessness? What was said within your family, who was born in Tehran, raised in Tehran, and have escaped as Jews from Tehran? Growing up, what was the feeling?
Well, I'll tell you, though my family had all left, my grandfather, who had a thriving life in Iran, had built a business and was prosperous in Iran. When he arrived in America, he didn't have language and he didn't have skills, and he had lost his position, and he ended up going back. So we grew up in a family where the patriarch of our family was still there. So there was deep fear in my early childhood about all the dangers that he was possibly facing. Those days, the 80s for me, I can only describe as heartbreak anew every day. There was a small place of hope that they had, that any day now, like, this cannot be the new reality. Any day it will crumble. There's so much evil there. How could God allow this to be? And being shocked and heartbroken every day anew with the terrible news that was coming out of Iran. Throughout the Iran-Iraq War was until 1988, and we were hearing of terrible things of children, Iranian children being kidnapped by the Islamic regime that was there, being kidnapped to be sent as cannon fodder to their war on the front lines of the war with Iraq. They were murdering young children and brainwashing them to go willingly to go and clear the landmines with their own bodies.
It's a cult that worships
the death cult.
This is so clear in understanding what I believe is a spiritual warfare that's been spreading since then. This idea of there are those who are seeking death and romanticizing death and transforming death into holy, while people of the West, of Judeo-Christian values who know God, recognize life is sacred, life is holy, and we have to do everything to protect that. And this is where there's a very clear clash. This isn't just a political situation. This is a spirituality of these death cults against those who cherish life.
Absolutely, and I want to give a lot of credit to the Iranian people. I want you to know, Americans need to know, there is a huge difference between the Islamic regime that has overtaken and oppressed the Iranian people. The people of Iran have been the first enemy number one of the state, of those who have taken over the regime. So they're the first enemy, and then of course the great Satan, so-called great Satan,
Israel.
the U.S., and the little Satan.
So you were
Israel.
explaining to me before we went live that there are two armies in Iran. One is for their own people, and the other is for outside of Iran.
Meaning there's a military to fight Israel and the U.S. and the West, and there's a military called the Basij that's like a police force to fight their own people and anybody willing to negate the government.
So all the women that take off their hijabs and are killed are from this army.
Exactly.
Anyone who on social media questions the Islamist
They have a morality police. It's not necessarily a military like in uniform and weapons running in the streets, but they're plain clothes policemen. They dress the same, other than the women are dressed in full covering and full garb, and they can write tickets as morality police in the streets if they see a woman who is not covering her body properly or her hair is showing. If her hair is showing, in fact, they'll bring violent armed police to attack them and arrest them on the spot.
So there is so much that we all want to hear about your story and about your childhood and about your upbringing, but we don't have so much time. So I want to talk about what's happening now. What's the feeling? You grew up in Los Angeles. You now live in Israel. Your family is still in Los Angeles. You still have people that you know and love in Iran. From what you hear from inside of Iran, is it similar to what your family and friends are saying in LA and what we're hearing here in Israel and in America? What's the feeling of the Iranian people right now? Are they for what Israel's doing? Are they happy that America got involved? And what are their hopes for the future?
What I hear is that there are millions of the Iranian people on the ground who are grateful to Israel and to Benjamin Netanyahu and to Donald Trump for finally 46 long years after 43 generations, finally addressing the regime with the language that they understand, with the language of force. The only way to their freedom that they see is with maximum pressure on the Islamic regime and maximum support for the Iranian people who are willing to stand up and fight their regime. Unfortunately, the people are unarmed. They do not have a second very much armed, ready, and willing. Protesters who dared to protest last week have already been executed this week. They do not have due process. They do not have any sense of fair trials, and they need our support. Very many of them are very heartbroken. The entire Iranian expatriate community and freedom fighters and dissidents and supporters of the Iranian people are heartbroken over this ceasefire. They beg the U.S. president to please reconsider, to figure out a way to continue to support the Iranian people to bring down their own government. They don't need us to go in with foot soldiers to liberate them. They are willing to be their own foot soldiers, but they are in desperate need of maximum support to help them bring down their own government. They are brave. The Iranian flag before the Islamic regime carried a lion with a sun and the sword, and they are brave lions, just like this operation is called Rising Lion. They too are the lion brothers and sisters of the people of Israel and willing to fight their own fight, but they need the support to be able to stand against their armed military that is attacking them in their own streets.
Panta, you are a spiritual person, a believing person, someone who sees the hand of God in everything. Why don't you end telling us what your prayer is for the future of Israel, America, Iran, and that will determine the future of the entire world.
Thank you. First of all, I just want to thank you, Yael, for just being so amazing and really being able to hold so many different angles of this story. It's not often that we are able to tell our full story from so many perspectives, and the spiritual perspective, my particular spiritual perspective.
Thank you for sharing with us. I've learned so much. I feel so inspired and encouraged. Do you feel inspired and encouraged? Have you learned about the Iranian people from Panta? I definitely have. So thank you for sharing with us.
Thank you. So my prayer for the people of Iran, first and foremost, is to not lose hope, is to recognize, indeed, you have maybe been disillusioned about what God is because the leaders, your oppressors, have taken God's name in vain and have misused religion to take advantage of the people, of the civilians, defenseless civilians. And I want to encourage you that if the God of Israel could bring the people of Israel out of Egypt by miracle, then know that this God of Israel is behind the people of Cyrus, who helped us rebuild our second temple in Jerusalem. Even if you don't believe in God, know that we're praying for you. We're praying to our God to help you. And if there were ever a week, if there were ever a time to test out this theory and call out to any God who's listening, I pray that our God's ears are open. I know deeply that our God's ears, figurative ears, are open. Please call out to him, and I bless you to see miracles. May you be strengthened. May your hearts be strengthened, our dear brothers and sisters in Iran. And may you see the future of freedom that you wish for yourselves. And may we celebrate in the streets of Iran and here in Jerusalem. We look forward to standing by your side and hearing good news from you soon.
I think of the biblical verse, Anenu b'yom korenu. I will answer you on the day that you call. And so, my friends, this is the time for all of us, from wherever we are, whether you agree with Panteha's personal position or find challenges with it, turn to God with your heart, with your words. God answers us on the day that we call. And I think what Panteha expresses as the daughter of Iranian refugees, who speaks Farsi, who watches the Iranian news, who has family and loved ones inside of Iran, is a desperate hope for freedom. And that's something we can all relate to. So may the world see this uprising of Judeo-Christian values, of joy, of peace, of love for one another, of the light of happiness and freedom and spirituality being spread, the sanctity of life instead of the darkness of these death cults that are trying to take over. And I believe that day is coming. May we see it soon.
Amen.
Thank you for joining us. If you found this interesting, informative, inspiring like I did, feel free to share it with your friends, with your church groups, with your synagogues, with your communities. It's important that we don't only know about each other through the news, but that we know each other through the hearts. And that's what we got today, the biggest gift from Panteha. Shalom from here in Israel.
Thank you. Shalom.